All right. Well, it's 1 o'clock, so we might as well get started. We have kind of a small day today. We only have two people online and two people who are both new people here in the room. I'm Paul Kjellberg. My last name is pronounced like a CH, but please just call me Paul. And I'm instructing this course on the history of Buddhist philosophy. This is a discussion-oriented class, so we're doing a lot of talking. If you can, talking to the mic, that way the people online can hear you. You push the button and the light goes on. So my name is Paul Kjellberg. I'm a professor of philosophy at Whittier College, which is right. I've been involved with the temple, teaching classes and doing various things for 20 some years. But I'm a philosophy professor. So I come at things from a very philosophical, theoretical, intellectual attitude, which is fine to come at things. And one of the things that we're doing in this class is exploring things from different sides and looking at different ways of going at things. Today, we're going to be looking at a particular philosopher, Nagarjuna. We'll get to that. But why don't, since we have some new people, why don't we take an opportunity to introduce ourselves, and let's do the online people first. So Tom, are you there? No, Tom's not there. How about
yeah. Sorry.
Oh, yes. Can you tell us about yourself, and then we'll have the new people introduce themselves afterwards.
Okay. Well, my name is Tom. I'm I teach Spanish, and I have been interested in Buddhism for a very long time, and I'm just happy to be a part of this class.
Thank you. Where are you, Tom?
I'm actually in San Antonio, Texas.
Oh,
So I
that
really,
sounds
yeah. So I really appreciate the classes are online.
great.
It's really, otherwise
It would be hard to attend.
would be impossible.
Well, thank you. Alfred, can you please tell our new guests about yourself?
Hi there. I'm Alfred Razor. I'm retired. I'm 79 years old. I also have been interested in Buddhism for a long time. I took these Buddhist classes in San Diego from the sister temple to Shilai Temple when I lived in San Diego. I lived there for 13 years. And incidentally, I lived in San Antonio for 3 years, and I practiced Buddhism there with the Tibetan Buddhist group. Yeah. So I enjoy these classes. What can I say? I love Buddhism, actually. It's such an antithesis to dogmatic Christianity. So I like it.
That's great. Thank you. And our new people, can you introduce yourselves?
Joseph, I'm attending this as part of a required field trip from my major world religions class, but I've always kind of been interested in Buddhism, and I think a nice little history or philosophy lesson would be the best way to kind of wet my toes and get introduced to, the deeper parts about Buddhism.
And he asked me if I wanted to come with him to this class, and I'm really interested in Buddhism, so I was definitely on board. Thank you.
Great. You said your name is Simon?
Simon, yes.
Simon, nice to meet you. So in this class, we started with our early Buddhism and talked about the Buddha's life and some of the questions that come up around the Buddha's life. We talked about some of the early teachings. Then we talked about the great transformation that occurred in early Buddhism from the earlier form of Theravada, which focused on salvation as an individual pursuit, to Mahayana, for which salvation is a collective pursuit. Along with that change came some new scriptures. The original scriptures, they're all called sutras, is just the Buddhist word for scripture. The original sutras were all sermons of the Buddha. They were lectures of the Buddha. They were given at particular times and places. They were comparatively realistic. There was just some guy up there talking and people listening and asking questions. With this new form of Buddhism, Mahayana, we began to get new scriptures like the Heart Sutra or the Diamond Sutra, which we're going to read in a couple of weeks, which are very weird and very different. And we looked at one of those last 2 weeks ago, and which was hard to understand. And now we're looking at one of the great thinkers of Buddhism, we call him a philosopher, Nagarjuna, who came a little bit after these sutras, but he seemed to explain the underlying meaning. And in particular, we're going to look at his idea of emptiness. So we're just going to read a little bit first, and then we'll discuss. So Nagarjuna wrote he wrote a lot of different things, but among them some very, very difficult short poems that say things like, neither from itself, nor from another, nor from both, nor without a cause, does anything whatsoever arise. It's hard to know what to make of that, but fortunately there's some good interpretations, and there's a very good one by a guy named J. Garfield, who explains that what Nagarjuna is articulating here is his idea of emptiness. And so I'll read through this, and then we can talk about it. It says, when Nagarjuna says of a table that it is empty, that statement invites the question, empty of what? And the answer is empty of inherent existence or self-nature, or in more Western terms, essence. Now, to say that the table is empty is hence simply to say that it lacks essence or inherent existence or self-nature, and importantly, not to say that it is completely non-existent. To say that it lacks essence is to say, as the Tibetans like to put it, that it does not exist from its own side, that its existence as the object that it is, that is, as a table, depends not just on it, but on us as well. That is, if our culture did not have this kind of furniture, then what appears to us to be an obviously single object, a table, might instead be correctly described as 5 objects, 4 sticks with a board on top. Apart from these, there is no table. From the Nagarjuna standpoint, when we ask of something, does it exist? We must always pay careful attention to the sense of the word exist that is at work. We might mean exist inherently, that is, as having an essence, or we might mean exist conventionally, that is to say, to exist dependently, to be the meaning of a word, but not to have any other existence of its own. Nothing, Nagarjuna will argue, exists in the first sense, but that does not entail that all phenomena are completely non-existent. Rather, to the extent that anything exists, it exists in the latter sense, that is, conventionally. All right, I'll give you guys a minute or two to read over that again, to think about it, and then I'm going to ask some questions. We're reading and thinking about this. All right. Before I ask some questions, I'll ask if any of you do. Any of you have any questions to start out with? By the way, Jonathan and Simon, this is Cassandra.
You met them briefly at the information booth.
Yeah, she actually pointed us the right way.
Oh, good. Any preliminary questions?
Yes, actually. So what's being said is so what's being asked, or rather, what I would like to ask is, the statement basically declares that to exist or to understand something, we have to understand like how we see it and what it's made of, or I'm sorry, that was probably the worst way to pose the question. It's confusing to me because the quote directly from Nagarjuna states that neither itself or we can place a definition or existence upon something. But the quote explains it as having existed because of, our recognition of it. Am I getting that correct? Like, we only see a table as a table because we understand it to be a table. Otherwise, if someone did not understand it was a table, it would be four sticks and a plank. So the table cannot recognize itself as a table, and we only recognize it as a table because of the concept we've placed on it, correct? So is this identifying something like in the middle, basically, that exists because of its essence? It exists because of. Actually, let me backtrack way back. Okay, because it is pretty advanced. What would the essence be, basically? Like, what would we define something as having existed only because of its essence, like because of what it is? Would that be basically like what we'd consider the divine? Or I'm sorry, this is probably a very confusing question.
It's a very good start. Let's leave it there for a minute and let's hear, do any of our people online, Tom or Alfred, do you have responses to Jonathan's question? Sorry, to Joseph's question. Joseph, yes.
I can't answer his question. I've been thinking about this idea at the very top that it has to have a cause. So I keep in my mind, I'm trying to ask myself, what caused the table to exist? I don't know. I mean,
you could ask the question a different way. Instead of saying what causes the table to exist, you could say what causes the table to be a table.
Well, of course, it's a table coming from the human mind. It's not a table coming from its own essence, as Jonathan said. It simply doesn't know anything. But the human mind, the human existence, the totality of human understanding has ascribed to that four-legged object table. And so we say it's a table, but that's us perceiving it as a table.
Tom, do you want to weigh in?
So yeah, this is very interesting. I like what question posed by the first person, and then also the explanation coming through, nor without a cause. I was sort of thinking about the word essence and essere, which would be Latin for being, and thinking some languages actually do have two verbs for being, and one as a resultant condition. So kind of thinking like nor without a cause. So it seems that it's a result of something. And we don't tend to go back to the origin of something. We tend to assume it is. And what the first person said about the divine, there was just thinking about that someone, I think, sort of approached it was from a perspective and said, well, only God is without changing. Everything from if the perspective is that there is a God that exists, whereas everything else is a result of things. So a different verb that kind of emphasizes that things are a result is used in some languages. So I kind of like the idea, yeah, that we decided that something is useful. There's 4 sticks and a board on top, and then we label it a table, and then we work from that concept. Something I was kind of interesting too that came up was the thought that when we're little kids and you hear like the verb, like I was thinking vacuum, and then as little kids you can pick up a little stick or a little block and pretend to be vacuuming, and in their minds when we're young we think that's vacuuming. So the concepts are sort of conventional and we learn how to apply them. So that's sort of what I was thinking.
Can you give an example of a language that distinguishes those two forms of to be for people who haven't studied the same languages? That's a great example.
Oh, sure. So I teach Spanish, and the verbs we have are ser and estar. So ser we tend to use it for what we would consider inherent condition. So grass is green. It's sort of what we kind of tend to think is its essence. And then if, let's say it's been very dry, as it has been in Texas, then you say the grass is brown. But then when it rains again, in English, we can say the grass is green, or we could say the grass is becoming green, or the grass is now green. But we have these little kind of markers, right? Grass is green is a generic statement. We don't use the, whereas in another language you might. Grass is green is sort of that inherent sort of there. But even there, it's like the idealized state, right? Because if we really think about it, we're aware that grass has different stages. But we tend to say grass is green, the sky is blue, the sun is yellow. And then if I remember correctly, basically from some studying of Greek philosophy, they actually have 3 verbs for to be. I lost a little bit of eyesight studying Greek and never made much progress, but I remember that thought. But again, all I can talk to you directly is Spanish, kind of ser is to be. You use it for things that don't typically change. That's kind of the way it's said. Like your religions don't typically change. Professions historically didn't typically change. But still, we can get to that estar, that things are a resultant condition, if that helps.
So we would say, for example, I soy Paul, I am Paul, but you would say, I estoy sitting down, because I'm always Paul, but I just happen to be sitting down. So you have 2 different verbs to be that you would use in those different contexts.
Exactly, you got it, yeah.
So let's go back over this. Cassandra, you've been quiet. So can you try to recreate the difference between inherent existence and dependent or conventional existence? And if you want to use the example of a table, or the Buddha uses the example of a cart, can you hand her the microphone?
Okay, I actually was looking into the concept of emptiness before my final project for the class. So one of the explanations that was given by I mispronounced his name, I can't say it. He one of his assistants said the following: if I said to you guys, there is no elephant in the room, but how do you guys know there's no elephant in the room? Because you guys have a concept of what an elephant is. So, but to have that concept, you are relating your knowledge to the current statement, there is no elephant. So whether you say this is a table or there is no elephant, you always have to relate it to some outside experience to understand where it is currently. The same thing if you told a child, if you had to explain to a child, this bucket is empty of water, they would have to know what it means to be full of water. So there's no independence either having it empty or having it full without knowing the previous one as well. That was how I understood it.
Does anyone?
I don't know, for orange, because the name and what it is, like, is it, there's no differentiation, I guess, like in so that really kind of like seems to me it's pretty significant in itself, you know. I don't know. I get I wonder what you guys think about that one right there. Thank you.
Colors are a very interesting example because the way we, there's a spectrum of colors, but the way we divide it up, it differs a whole lot depending on our culture. In fact, I think they didn't even have a word for orange until fairly late. There was yellow and there was red and there was something between yellow and red, but they didn't have a word for orange until kind of recently. If you look at if you go to a paint factory or a clothing catalog, they have a million different colors, but Isaac Newton divided it up into 7. Or in Chinese, Qing, what the color Qing? Is that you?
Yes.
So what is the color Qing?
Green.
You
Yeah, my name is Ching, and the meaning is the color of green.
Yes, but you can also describe the sky as Qing, can't you?
Yeah, you can say that. Different kind of green. But
what kind of green is the green sky?
Green sky, actually in Chinese, when we say Qing, it's more like describing it kind of to the yellowness. No, sorry, the blueness, the blue color. It's kind of interchangeable. I don't know how to explain.
And you can also describe a bruise get hit on your arm.
Yes.
That's also Qing.
Yes.
So that's very weird. Those colors don't seem the same to us with the Western color spectrum at all. Or Cassandra?
Also something, if I'm looking at something green, it's like, let's say it was a random, like a cube, a green cube. The atoms it's made of is not green. Atoms have no color. So our perception of green is dependent on us having the eyes that are able to translate wavelengths of light. So everything about what we're seeing is relative or in reference to something else.
So not only does our calling it green depend on our having a certain kind of eyes, which distinguish this wavelength, but then also our calling that kind of wavelength green.
Yeah, and if you remove that, atoms itself, they don't have a color. So it just so happens that beyond the wavelength, the way the atmosphere is at a particular moment, that's how the light is being refracted to us. So that color could be a different color in a different atmosphere.
Have you ever had that problem when you get a new car, you buy it during the bright day, and then in the evening you go and look for it, and it's a different color in the evening, and you can't recognize your own car? There's a famous philosophical problem. It comes from John Locke, and I'm sure you've heard it. If a tree falls in the forest and if a tree falls in the forest and there's no one there to hear it, does it make any sound? What do you think, Cassandra, given the argument that you just made?
I want to initially say there is a sound. Whether we perceive it or not, that's irrelevant. Because I think things happen without the humans being the center of the universe.
But is that like asking if atoms have a color?
I think sound's a little bit different because technically space has a sound, but we can't hear it because of our ears. So it's the same thing. The tree is falling in space, but we can't hear it but there is noise.
The sound would need an atmosphere, correct? For the sounds to be perceived by someone. So, like, I guess the atmosphere. And another thing is weird, like, because like green is, they say, is a combination of blue and yellow, I think. Like if you look at the sun, it's yellow and the sky is blue. And what the grass needs is the nourishment of water, which is, you could say, is from the sky, the blue, and then the sunlight's the yellow. And when it grows, it comes out to be green, you know? I don't know, just putting that out there.
But that point about needing an atmosphere in order to hear sound. If the tree falls in the forest, there are wavelengths, there are reverberations. Our ear interprets those reverberations as sounds. When is the reverberation the same thing as a sound?
I mean, from the perspective of someone who cannot hear, I'd imagine it'd be a very similar experience, no matter what sound is made or depending on the strength of the sound. And I think if a tree falls in the forest, there are animals present to hear it, and they can perceive that the tree has fallen, and thus I do believe there is a sound there. And when it comes to objects being of certain make and whether they carry the quality of being colored or not, or a specific color or not, they just are, and it is our job to maybe assign those definitions, whether it is colored or whether it is this color or that color, or whether what happens to the tree is a sound, or if it's reverberations, or if it's just a happening. There's something essential about, I think, scientific law, at least. It says the tree falls, and if there is an action of mass, there must be some sort of response from that. So there are essential laws that basically dictate that the tree will fall eventually, and the tree will make a sound or will make reverberations when it falls. But I find it hard to apply that to, if an object is made of wood, then it must be red, or it must be brown, or it must be orange. That's where I start to struggle to apply these sort of essential or non-essential definitions.
The question is when the reverberation becomes a sound. Does it become a sound when it leaves the tree, or does it become a sound when it hits the ear? Vibrations.
Yes. So like the vibrations are there, and then they reverberate. So whether you're there initially or not, at some point you might come across the echoes, you know.
But if we had a very different kind of ear, like say the way a frog does,
yes,
or the way a bat's different kind of eye, they have very, very different senses that we don't know whether they're like our sounds or colors at all. And we've seen those pictures on science shows about what the world looks like through different kinds of eyes. And even that's just a reconstruction because it's completely different. So it seems like there's, what is there before we define it? I mean, it seems like there's something there, but we can't define what's there before we define the terms we use to describe it. So it's kind of easy when you think of things like tables, when you think of artificial things. Whether it's four sticks with a board on top, and if we didn't have a cultural category of table, we wouldn't identify that thing as a table. Or if call two things the same color that look different colors to us, and vice versa, or different things. Yang. They're different kinds of yang. So but is that true? Do you think of, see if you could make the same argument about, say, a mountain. The mountain's always there and was there before anybody came along. Is a mountain an example of something that exists inherently, or is there a sense in which its existence depends on us? Anyone online can volunteer if you want to.
We don't monopolize.
Alfred, were you going to give it a try?
Well, in all these examples, I'm struck by the fact that it's human perception only that we're talking about here. The grass is only green because of the human mind. The table's only a table because of the human mind. The tree falls in the forest, but the sound is something that comes from that we hear. We hear. So it's all causes and conditions which coalesce for us to perceive an event or thing.
So then could you, how would you explain to someone the way in which a mountain, a very old mountain, is how, in what way does its existence depend on us?
Us is what called it a mountain. It was nothing until, I mean, it did have an essence. There was something there, but humans came along and we'll call this mountain. And then they started to do that. So now for the rest of human history, it's a mountain. But it does have an essence, just like the ocean has an essence. I can't go any further. I can't get out of this rabbit hole.
Cassandra?
I agreed with Alfred, but I actually thought about it a little differently because I was thinking about the mountain from a chemistry perspective, because the mountain is what? Rocks. What is rock? And you go down all the way to atoms and the subatomic level. But basically, forms are forms are forms. And these forms, they only exist in how they relate to us. So we are the ones that...
Wait, can you explain?
That we are the ones that are assigning order to these forms. Because if we want, for some reason, we decided to call the vast body of water an ocean. That was an arbitrary thing that we did. We don't call two pools of water oceans. So how we label things is in relation to how it appears to humans.
That back to the mountain?
It's just basically arbitrary that we called it a mountain. We could have said it's only a mountain if there's two peaks to a mountain, but we have a specific definition of what a mountain is to us. We wouldn't call a hill a mountain, but that's just because it's how we perceive the world and how we're relating to the world as humans.
So there's something there. Let's just say that there's something there, but it doesn't become a mountain until we mountain it.
I think using the word become is not accurate, because it's, everything's always in transition. It never became a mountain. It's the process that right now in time, we see it as a mountain, but it may not be a mountain in the future. So I think the point is there's no independent existence, because there's always a cause and effect, and every object is in transition between that cause and effect.
Could you say it doesn't exist as a mountain until we mountain it? Or it doesn't exist as a mountain except in our mountaining of it?
I think so, yeah. I think it becomes a mountain when we say it's a mountain.
Simon, you're looking quizzical.
I don't know. Hello? Hello. Okay, there we go. So when I hear the word mountain, a mountain, that's remember of like an amount, an increment, or a unit. Like so, and we don't tend to relate mathematics to what we're saying. I think that's what we probably got to do, and then take the linguistics of it all, and figure it out from there. Because things got to amount to things, you know. If you get what I'm saying.
Explain a little more.
Okay. And it's funny, I can't figure out the microphone. There we go. And an amount is a number, you know? 1 + 1 is amounts to something. I think that has a lot to do with what a mountain is. Because if you look at the mountain from the distance, see it as a singular object or whatever, or a range of mountains. But you get closer to the mountain, you go up the windy road, you start getting closer to things, the definition of things starts to become very like how it is right here, you know, from the ground level. You start to see the trees. Oh, well, there's trees, there's roads, there's houses, there's even humans. So looking from the distance, it's hard to believe that that's what's up there. So a mountain in actuality is not just a mountain. There's a whole bunch of things up there.
Or a lot of different ways of describing the things that are up there. All right, now the more difficult levels. And first of all, it's much easier for me to see the people in class. Those of you online, if you want to jump in, please just jump right in, because I can't, and I don't like to call on you without being able to look at your face and seeing that you're ready to talk.
Yeah. Oh, hi. Yeah, so I think I was just chuckling because when I teach, I always joke and tell the students, the ones who look a little afraid, I pick on them, or etc. But I was thinking it makes what everyone was saying, that maybe these things have a life of their own, the mountains, but it's not independent of cause or effect. So the rise, abide, decline, pass away. And I was wondering, there was this poem that I thought was, when I was a grad student, about how we perceive the world and how we create things with language. Language is being arbitrary and conventional, but it's agreed upon more or less. But the mountain does exist for time. It has its own life. And then we define it, and we sort of try to make sense or define what the world is, if that. So I was curious how, from literary studies, I was curious how you might look at this poem and how that it's in the chat.
So means what a poem means can depend on the reader to a certain extent. And certainly even whether a poem is a poem, you know, if a bug was flying by and saw the book open, they'd just see blotches against a background. That wouldn't be a poem for them. So with something like a poem, it seems easier to sort of wrap your mind around the fact that it exists in our mind, the same way the 4 sticks and a board or a table in our mind. Even with something like a mountain, you can get around to the fact that this pile of particles is a mountain because we designate particles of that shape as mountains. But Simon raised more difficult examples. What about number? I mean, you can call 2 by different names depending on what language you're in, but it seems like 2 is 2 is 2 is 2.
I actually read this in the Buddhist book recently. Numbers are relative, and the starting point of emptiness is 0. So the 2 is a 2 in relation to 0.
Explain.
So 0, I don't know if you guys know about like the Mayan and Mayan mathematics. To them, like the 0 was not nothing, but it was pretty much completion. Like what I mean by that is, like, say you have a number and you wanna it's hard to explain. It holds the place for the numbers for when you don't want to represent it with a number, like for the zero. Like you don't want to say it's nothing, but you want to say it's like higher power, like the tens, ones, tens, hundreds. Like you put a zero in place to represent the next increment up, you know? So it's not nothing, actually.
Yeah, just there we go. Hi. So yeah, that actually kind of helped me out there to understand it. Like, so from zero, basically everything originates. So maybe zero would be the essence, and anything we add to that would be entirely from like within ourselves, like adding or recognizing further value outside of what it inherently is. Maybe I think that's how I'm kind of drawing it back to the lesson at hand.
All right, let's try another hard one. How about space and time? Does space and time exist because we perceive them, the way a poem becomes a poem because we look at it that way? Or does space and time exist inherently by themselves?
Okay, this is okay. Also just read this, so this just happened to be the right question. Space and time are relative because in the beginning, when the universe was created, time did not exist. Time only existed when certain conditions were met in the very beginning of the universe.
But if you're saying certain conditions were met, that means they weren't met before and they were met afterwards. Doesn't that require time?
They weren't, well, there was no time. Scientifically, time is a fourth dimension. So in the very beginning, like the nanosecond of the universe, the conditions were not there for time to exist. And I forget, I'm still studying this, but there's a certain point where the quantum particles were interacting with each other that caused the condition for time to begin, even if it was a nanosecond after the universe was born.
But was that point a point in time?
See, this is where it gets tricky. Once that starts, then time goes. But if we think about it, one of the particles, a photon, goes as fast as time, so there is no time for it. But we can't say the photon has an inherent existence because it's in relation to the time parameter. So I think this is a roundabout way of saying, even from the beginning, it was all relative until whatever that 0-second mark was for the universe. That, who knows if it had an inherent existence.
That's too much for me. Can anybody else help us out and shed any light on this? Especially anybody online, because you guys have been quiet.
Okay, so space and time, it's like I don't know, like when I was younger, I was like, I didn't really think about the beginning of space and time. Like to me, it's just there, you know? Like I do really believe that I don't know, whatever they want to call the Big Bang. I don't think that's like an initial start point of time. Like time has to have been there already or something. Like I believe the universe is much more older than what we think it is. Like we're skipping something somewhere, and it's not making any sense to us. Because I mean, even if you look at the new telescope that they sent out into space, it's coming back with pictures of things that are so far away, and yet they're evolved, and they're not expecting to see evolved galaxies that far away, you know? And thinking about like the stars that are in those galaxies, and they say there's like a whole mess load of them. So it's like, how is that possible? Well, I'm not really a believer in the Big Bang, that is. So I kind of knew that that's what they were going to find when they took pictures and looked. But yeah, it's very strange.
How about another one? This might shed light on it. Sameness and difference. there's only a difference between blue and green if you have a certain kind of eye, right? If you see in black and white like a dog, or I don't think anybody's blue-green colorblind, but if you're blue-green colorblind, they would look the same. So their difference is their difference to us. We make them different by differentiating between them. They're different because we call them different. Cassandra's looking as I'm not making sense.
Or maybe rephrase the question. I understand what you're saying about the difference, but I don't understand the question.
That we say, for example, with something like colors, it seems pretty straightforward that they exist as different colors because we're able to because we differentiate between them. Or similarly, you might say, fair and foul balls in baseball. They exist because we differentiate fair and foul balls. There's no inherent fair or foulness. It's something that we project onto the field. Do you think the same is true of sameness and difference? Do things only become the same and different when we regard them as the same and different, or is sameness and difference something that's inherent to things in themselves? Does that make sense?
That reminds me of like division and multiplication. Like you could get the same number whether you divide or multiply, kind of. You get what I'm saying? Like maybe, okay, 10 divided by 2 is 5. But you could also take 2 and multiply it by 5 to get the same thing, you know? I don't know. I guess it's more deeper.
I would almost argue that our understanding of like sameness and difference depends on how we view like objectivity. Like can things objectively be something? And if so, how would we objectively, or how would we first off define objectivity?
Wait, say that again. Can things objectively be something? What do you mean?
That's a good question. You caught me. I'd almost say that by our definition of what could be like objective fact, we can reach conclusions based on our own like relative understanding of things and classify something as, what it is. So a foul ball is a foul ball because it's these certain points that we make as humans to ease our understanding of it. So I think on like an essential level, maybe there is no difference between yellow and blue. It just sort of depends on how we've kind of logically simplified the worlds in order to like exist and cope within it. I think that's my view on it.
Yeah, I'm already forgetting the way you first phrased the question, which jumped out at me. You talked about having objective existence. Something can have objective existence. In Garfield's language, do you think objective existence is inherent or conventional?
I would almost be inclined to say that objectivity is conventional in and of itself, and that there are some things that are beyond objective that are essential. They exist beyond our ability to like comprehend or classify them as anything but like the weakest, most conventional definitions we can assign them. So we think of a divine higher power, we call it the divine. We think of what time is, the force of time, and we define it as time. We think as blue, and those things which can be objective, thus are conventional definitions for us, but I think in essence they would always exist, and it kind of takes like both for us to be able to recognize that object in existence.
Someone once gave the comparison to me that it's like looking for the dark with a flashlight, because everywhere you shine the light, all you're seeing is light, and that we try to find objective truth using our subjective impressions. Whatever we see is subjective. Or similarly, we might try to find inherent existence using our conventional knowledge, but everything turns up conventional. That doesn't mean that the dark isn't out there. It just means you're never going to find it with a flashlight. All right, then let me ask you one more. Here's a good hard one. How many have any of you read Descartes, Rene Descartes? You've heard of Rene Descartes. What have you heard of? What do you remember his famous line?
I went through it was my AP European history class in high school. That's when I learned the most about Descartes. But it's kind of
the most famous Descartes line that is particularly relevant to Buddhism is he said, "I think, therefore I am." And the way that came up was he was living in a very tumultuous time in the 17th century in European history. And a lot of things that they had long believed were true were turning out false, like the world turned out to be round, like the earth went around the sun instead of the sun going around the earth. And Descartes starts out his meditation saying, a lot of the things that I used to believe, I've realized now are false. And a lot of the sources that I used to trust, I've realized now are untrustworthy. So I'm going to have to try to sort this out. And in order to do that, I'm going to see if I can find, I'm going to look and see if there's, I'm going to doubt everything and see if I can find one fact that I know is true, one thing that couldn't possibly be false. So he goes through all of his thoughts and sort of rules them out one by one. But finally, he comes down to the thought, I exist. Because he says, even if I'm wrong about everything else, even if some other planet dreaming, everything else. He said, even if God is deceiving me, even if there's a God and God is deceived, do you think the self exists inherently or conventionally? Which do you think comes first, your being Cassandra or you're thinking of yourself as Cassandra, like the examples we gave at the table in the mountain?
I see. I'm going to make a bold statement here. I'm going to say there is nothing that inherently exists, because then we have to really reanalyze all the core concepts of Buddhism. So I think one of like a question to respond to your answer is, what is an example of anything that inherently exists? Even myself, I am Cassandra because of the particular parents I was born to, the context in which I was brought up, how the environment interacted with me, the people interacted with me. Even if, for example, if there was a soul, if it was born again in England, probably the Cassandra that would come out on that side would not be who I am right now, because they would have different parents, different upbringing. And again, that's relative. It's cause and effect. And
but would that Cassandra exist?
She would, but to her own context.
Explain.
She would exist as Cassandra in the world that she is in. I don't know how.
Which comes first, you or the way you're perceived?
I think maybe how I'm understanding it is I think you just get a spark of life when you're born. But I think, for example, your temperament, your personality is formed throughout your life. So even if I did not exist and there was a Cassandra who existed instead of me, she would still be Cassandra, but whatever that Cassandra would be called would have whatever temperament and personality that was pertinent to her context.
So you mean she'd still be the name Cassandra?
She could be whatever, but I think I just think, there is no permanence to whatever it is that we call soul here conventionally.
Do any of our online people have any thoughts they want to contribute?
Well, in Hinduism, they believe that the jiva has no birth and has no death. And I don't know if the jiva can be called the soul, but the living essence, the spiritual essence, sorry. The spiritual essence has no beginning and has no end, but it can be transformed by certain causes and conditions during the life that we're in right now. But the jiva doesn't die, according to Krishna. I don't know if the Buddha followed on that idea or not. I'm constantly thinking in this discussion, what do you mean by God when you all are using this term God? And what do you mean by the higher power? Did Buddha find a higher power? Did he find a prime mover in the universe?
Is it empty? Could emptiness be the prime mover?
Well, I don't think so.
Well, we're running out of time, but it does raise the question we're going to be looking at next week, because Nagarjuna takes this argument one step further. He says, nothing that we can point to has inherent existence. What we can point to is always conventional existence. So in that sense, things are empty of inherent existence. But then he goes on to make the argument that that emptiness is itself empty, because it's because we recognize it as empty, because we distinguish between emptiness and fullness, that we say that it's empty. So the emptiness of things is also empty of existence, which seems like you've gotten yourself in a huge knot there, but he's going to have an argument why that emptiness the emptiness of emptiness is in fact the best thing that ever happened to us. Because if we understood the world any other way, salvation would be impossible. But that's for next week. And we'll also spend some time talking next week. Hopefully there will be more people back about our student run days at the end of the semester. So if anybody else wants to volunteer for that, let me know next week. But thank you all very much for coming. Alfred and Tom, thank you for your contributions. And I'll see you next week.
And